One. Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we've got more Duskmourn spoilers from the last couple days. Lots of new combos, lots of new synergies, some pretty sweet new cards coming to standard and older formats. Let's just start off with Silent Hall Creeper. Very creepy art here. 2 mana for a 1/1. It's an enchantment creature, a horror, and it can't be blocked. And it deals whenever it deals combat damage to a player, choose one that hasn't been chosen. Put 2+1/+ encounters on it, draw a card, or it becomes a copy of another target creature you control. So this card's got a lot going on and pretty cool design card. The first thing I thought of was maybe a really good target for ethereal armor because this both is an enchantment creature, so it'll continue to pump the Silent Hall Creeper. So ethereal armor just by itself is +2/+2. Any other enchantments are more. So if you had multiple Hall Creepers and multiple ethereal armors, that would be just stacking up more damage there, and it can't be blocked as well, so you're going to get through with the damage every time. And then when you hit them, you can put counters on it, and just kind of maybe kill them in 2 swings with an ethereal armor. So potentially, if there is an ethereal armor deck, I think this guy would see some play in that for sure. The other thing I was thinking about is, okay, what about the fact it's unblockable is pretty good with like Gix. Is nice because you can draw cards off him, but then you can draw more cards with Gix. So anything unblockable is pretty nice with Gix. And then the copy a creature mode is really interesting because there's not really any 2 mana clones in standard that can copy anything unconditionally. And it also is sort of a triggered ability to copy something. So you could curve this turn 2, and then turn 3 you could play, for example, like Preacher of the Schism would be pretty sweet to copy and attack, get in for 1, and then you have 2 Preachers on turn 3, which is pretty strong. Also, there's some like jank combo potential here with Archfiend of the Dross, because if you use like an activated ability to copy Archfiend of the Dross, it comes in with no counters on it, or just the copy doesn't have any counters on it. So if you were able to have this, the Archfiend of the Dross, and then a way to donate the Silent Hall Creeper, which becomes a copy of the Archfiend of the Dross, to your opponent, there's a few ways that bird that flips over and can donate things. So that could be just like a jank combo win potential. So definitely a cool card to think about and to brew around. All right, we've got the Unstoppable Slasher, which is a 3 mana 2/3 zombie assassin. So it is an assassin too. I didn't put it on the slide, but there are quite a few assassins in this set, which are kind of interesting. So kind of reevaluate that Atrada assassin deck in standard could be something to think about. Also a zombie. There's a few zombie synergies in standard, not as that much anymore, but for older formats that could matter as well. But it has Death Touch, and when it deals combat damage to a player, they lose half their life rounded up. So that's pretty sweet, right? And then if it dies, it has no counters on it. Returns to the battlefield tapped with 2 stun counters. So really, this is unstoppable. This keeps coming back and back and back. Very annoying to play against. Kind of a 2-for-1 a lot of the time against removal because it keeps coming back. There are some kind of infinite combo potential with Solemnity because that says creatures can't get counters. So if you have a sacrifice outlet and Solemnity, that can kind of go infinite to have it keep coming back over and over again because it can't get counters on it, and then it can sacrifice it again. But in terms of standard, there's Bloodletter of Alcazaz, which is a really nice, turn turn 4 kill if you get through with this. Of course, they have to have no removal or blockers for that to actually work, but it could work if you played this on 3 and then the Bloodletter on 4, and then you attacked. They lose half their life, and then they lose twice of half, which is their full life. So that's a kind of a cool combo. You could even do this when Landwar Elves comes into standard. You could, if you had the mana, although the mana is a little shaky on the number of mana symbols. But you could go turn 1 Landwar Elf, turn 2 Unstoppable Slasher, turn 3 Bloodletter, and win on turn 3. So there's that cool potential. And then I was like, okay, what else is this good with? Maybe it's like Double Strike. If you give Double Strike, I was trying to do the math on the Double Strike and double check my math. So if you attack with this and they're like, okay, well, I'll just lose half my life. I don't want to lose my creature here. And you like instant speed, give it Double Strike, for example, with the twice the rage on the 2-head hunter here. So they would take 2, and then let's say they're at 20, they go to 18, and then they'd go down to 9, right? from that, lose half their life, and then they take 2 again from the second strike, go to 7, and then they lose half their life and go to 3, I believe, rounded up, because they'd lose 4 there. So they go to 3 life. So that would be an attack for 17 damage essentially, if you give it double strike. So then you just like lightning strike them to win. I don't know. That's kind of sweet, right? Um, and then I don't know. Also, this card Escape Tunnel, which doesn't really see much play, but it could give it the ability to not be blocked. So you could guarantee to get in with the Unstoppable Slasher. And there's other ways to kind of maybe make sure it gets in. There's other ways to make creatures unblockable, but that was kind of an easy one you could incorporate even into your mana base if you're kind of building a combo or just have this in your deck. So pretty cool card, interesting design for sure. There are other ways also in standard to remove counters from creatures. So that's also something to keep in mind. Glissa is the kind of one that comes to mind. Though when it hits a player, you can remove counter, so that could also work with its last ability. So a lot of cool stuff going on with this card. I have the sense I'll see some play somewhere in standard because it's got a lot of powerful stuff, but we'll have to see. Okay, next up we've got another Leyline. I think this is our last Leyline. Yeah, all the Leylines seem pretty strong, especially that red one. If you haven't seen my video, I posted yesterday about that. But this is the green one here, the last one, the Leyline of Mutation, which again, if it's in your opening hand, you can begin the game with it, and then you can pay Wooburg, so one of each color, to cast spells. So that's pretty cool, right? In older formats, you got Emrakul. 5-mana Emrakul seems pretty good. You could even ramp on turn 1 and 2, and then cast Emrakul on turn 3 if this was in your opening hand. In standard, we got a whole lot of kind of big guys that you could cast. You know, Itali, but I was thinking something like Galta would be nice if you cast that for 5, because then that would put all your other big stuff into play. Or one with Multiverse if you cast that for 5 mana, because then you could cast another big thing from your hand for free, or from the top of your deck for free. So this seems pretty good. Thunderous Debut kind of seems kind of sweet because you could just bargain away the Leyline if you wanted to, and just maybe hit 2 things and win the game right away with 2 giant creatures. And then I was thinking, well, you can actually get this off on turn 3. There are some ways of getting 5 mana on turn 3. If you had this in your open hand, you go turn 1, play any sort of food. There's a lot of 1 mana ways to make food, and then play the Thorn Vault Forger on 2, and then turn 3, sacrifice it, and then you have 5 mana. And it also is any combination of colors. So that can help get to your 5 different colors. That would be kind of a cool way to go turn 3 Galta in standard. Yeah, pretty good, right? Turn 3 Atraxa, whatever giant thing you want to cast. So I think this card's got some potential. It also is like kind of okay if you don't have it in your opening hand. That's certainly something you want to think about with ley lines, but this one actually kind of seems alright. That if you draw it on your first or second turn, um, that you could even go like, if, for example, if you want turn 2 Thorn Vault Forger, then turn 3 you play the ley line, then turn 4 you use its ability. That's still pretty decent to cast anything from your hand, potentially game-winning play. So it's obviously better if it's in your opening hand, but this one, I think it's like at least usable if it's not in your opening hand, because its casting cost and its ability kind of curve into each other, essentially. All right, cool. Let's see. We've got the Ominous Flytrap, which is a 3-mana plant, 2/4, and it has Delirium. And when it enters or attacks, if there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, distribute 2 +1/+1 counters among 1 or 2 target creatures. Then if there are 6 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, double the number of +1/+1 counters on those creatures. So this card is really interesting. It's very much a Delirium card. If you don't have Delirium or the Super Delirium mode on this, this is just a terrible card. It's a 3-mana or a 2/4. You'd never play that. Maybe in limited, you could play that, but if it really wants you to have Delirium for this to do anything. But if you do have Delirium, it is quite strong. It comes into play. Let's say it was the only creature that you had out. It comes into play as a 3-mana 4/6, which is decent, and then every time you attack, it gets +2/+2 counters, just as itself. Not to mention, if you had managed to have 6 card types, that could be extremely good. So it would double the number. So it would come into play as a 6/8 essentially if you had that. So it's pretty big, and it can also distribute counters to other creatures, of course. So if you have sort of a self mill deck with when you're trying to turn on Delirium, and this is you're able to do it on turn um, 3. That's pretty good. I was thinking, what are their enablers? Like Cash Grab is pretty good. We just got that one from Bloomburrow. The Branchwood Prowler, any creatures that could mill would be useful because then you could distribute the counters on something else because this may get hit with removal. It's also a plant, so it kind of works with Insidious Roots in some ways, maybe, and also works with the graveyard. So maybe there's some synergy there if you want to play those in the same deck. And then I was thinking it could be kind of cool and like with Helping Hand too, maybe because you're trying to self mill so much, you can return it with Helping Hand, and there's other effects that are similar to Helping Hand that return a creature with 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield directly. Because if you're doing a self mill, maybe you mill over one of these guys, and then you just on turn 3 you just play another mill thing, and then you play the Helping Hand, and then it comes right into play with Delirium. So yeah, some ideas there. This guy is really kind of dependent on, again, I keep saying this, but like how easy it is to turn on Delirium. Um, but if it is, I think it's got some shot of seeing some play because its abilities are certainly powerful. And if it's easy for some reason to get 6 or more card types in your graveyard, then this guy is incredibly powerful, I would say. But that seems like maybe a stretch. Yeah, so we'll have to see on this guy. All right, next up we've got the Reluctant Role model, which is a 2-mana human survivor, so you know it has a survival ability. It's a 2/2, and at the beginning of your second main phase, if it's tapped, you put a flying, lifelink, or +1/+1 counter on it. So kind of cool that you can choose between those different modes and counters. And whenever it or another creature you control dies, if it had counters on it, put those counters on up to 1 target creature. So certainly an interesting design, and the last ability is pretty unique in some ways. It's kind of like modular, but it kind of gives that to all your other creatures, which is really interesting. Um, so, on level 1, you kind of want to use this as you use all survival cards, which is, either finding ways to attack with it or ways to just tap it, and then the stalwart or like convoke cards like the Knight Errant of Eos, and there's lots of other cards that let you vehicles and mounts that let you kind of tap things are good ways. I like this guy because if you put a flying counter on him, and then it's pretty easy for him to attack the next turn potentially. They don't have any flying guys on it, so he can it kind of snowballs with this guy, and then the +1/+1 counters you put on him make him easier to attack the next turn as well. So um, pretty strong, I think, potential with this guy. And then the last ability uh, works, of course, with +1/+1 counters. For example, the Botanical Brawler is pretty nice because that can get a ton of different counters, and this can get counters itself, and that can trigger the Brawler to get bigger. Um, and then if one of those dies, those counters can be moved somewhere. Um, so some maybe in a +1/+1 counter deck, but also they haven't really revealed much. I think the patched plaything may be the only one with -1/-1 counters in the set, but maybe there'll be more. I'm not sure. But it's kind of interesting with -1/-1 counters, or I was trying to think if there are any other like counters that you'd want to actually give to your opponent's creatures, because this last ability says put those counters on up to 1 target creature, not you control. But so, for example, if the patched plaything died and had 2 counters, you could put those -1 counters on your opponent's creature, so and kill one of their creatures. So that seems kind of interesting, right? And maybe there's some, maybe I don't know. I'm not thinking in older formats. There's other counters you actually want to like give to your opponent's creatures that would be beneficial for them, for you to give to them. So definitely an interesting card, unique abilities, and I think has some standard potential as well. Okay, next up we've got another room card, which is the Unholy Lobby and Ritual Chamber. So on the left, the Unholy Lobby is 3 mana at the beginning of your end step. Draw a card. If you control a demon, each opponent loses 2 life, and you gain 2 life. Otherwise, you lose 2 life. So interesting kind of Phyrexian Arena style card. I think this card is actually maybe a little better than Phyrexian Arena. I don't know. It's hard to say. But Phyrexian Arena doesn't really see that much play in Standard, or like none at all, really. So just on its own, I don't know if that's good enough. But the right side is pretty decent. 5 mana for when you unlock it, you create a 6/6 black demon creature token with flying. So that's pretty cool that you can turn on the demon ability on the left with the right side. So some cool synergy there. Obviously, if you have the demon ability going on the left on the Unholy lobby, that's really strong to just draining your opponent for 2 every turn and also drawing a card. There's not a ton of cheap demons. There are some decent demons. The 4-drop demons that I talked about in one of my other videos are all pretty decent. The only 2-drop one is, I'm not going to try to pronounce that, the uh, Demon. It's 2 mana 2/2, which isn't great. There's also a Changeling that's 2 mana, so that could be good if you wanted to curve this into the Unholy lobby. Um, that could be decent, but it's just a 2 mana 2/2, so really that's not great. Although that ability to drain for 2 is pretty strong, so maybe it's worth it in some sort of demon deck. Again, maybe there's more demon synergies that we're not quite getting yet, and it would be worth it to run a 2 mana 2/2 just because it's a demon. There is sort of the Leyline that could also turn all your creatures into demons. That's a possibility. But okay, what do you do sort of with the other modes? So there is this sort of ghostly key bearer. There's other sort of synergies within rooms themselves. There's a room that adds mana just for casting and unlocking other rooms. The key bearer lets you kind of unlock any room for free if you hit your opponent, so that could be pretty nice just to unlock the right side and get the demon. And that's a pretty big demon too. I think it's maybe one of the biggest token creatures that is in standard right now. And so with Geared, for example, or there's other ways to just copy tokens in standard. I think Geared is probably the most efficient way, but having a 5 or a 6/6 black demon that you could just copy a bunch of times right away might be a game-winning play. So something to think about. It's an interesting card, an interesting design. I want to see how many kind of other demon synergies we get before fully having a verdict on this one, but definitely a cool room design. All right, next up, the one that everybody's talking about, the Mind Render, which is the triple blue 3 mana legendary enchantment nightmare. It is a 10/1, which is an interesting stat line. I don't think there's any other creatures in Magic's history that are 10/1s. Not that I can really think of. Maybe there are, but um, it can't be blocked. It's looking pretty good. However, if a source you control would deal damage to an opponent, prevent that damage, and each opponent mills that many cards. So, interesting card, right? On level 1, it's sort of like maybe you play this in a mill deck, right? Maybe you just go full on mill your opponent. It's actually not that bad in a mill deck, I would say. I mean, it is kind of unfortunate. It just dies to some removal. It doesn't die to cut down, which is nice to have on your creature. Not dying to cut down, but it does die to like basically everything else. Um, so it can't be blocked. So maybe kind of just like milling your opponent for 10 every turn might get there in a mill deck. I mean, that's not terrible. But how do we take advantage of the fact that it has 10 power is really the question, and the fact that it can't be blocked. So Sunspine Links comes to mind in standard because if you have an ability that says it can't be prevented, then it kind of negates the second part of this, I believe. So then it just will deal damage, regular damage, essentially. So if you go Mind Render into Sunspine Links, maybe do a couple damage to your opponent with the Sunspine Links, maybe to yourself, because you're probably playing, if you're playing a blue-red deck, you're going to have a lot of non-basics to get the mana costs here, but not impossible to curve these into each other. Then you could attack for 10 that turn, and then 10 the next turn and win that way. So that's kind of nice. It does give your opponent a chance to react to it, but um, also, the insult and injury is really nice with this. I think that's Pioneer legal. So if you played this on 3 and then insult injury, or just insult side, that says damage can't be prevented. And then if a source you control with damage, it deals double. So this would just do 20 right away. Pretty sweet, right? You can also fling this guy just to do damage directly to your opponent with Thrill Seeker, for example, or there's some other fling effects. I don't think it works with Burn Together, the 1 mana one, because the creature is still in play, I believe, when it deals the damage. So, or it would mill them for 10, but it wouldn't do damage to them. And then I thought it was kind of cool with the Skullport Nexus, just because you could it would cost, make this Skullport Nexus cost 2, and then you could double its power. And if it died, you would get like a 20/20 token, which is kind of cool. Or you could just attack and mill them for 20, and then 20 the next turn. So that's kind of interesting. I don't know. We'll see. Let me know if there's any other cool combos or synergies you can think of. This guy, that's got a lot going on for it. It's also an enchantment for what that's worth. But yeah, definitely an interesting one to think about of how to use the best. I don't know if it's going to be super competitive just because it's got 1 toughness in it, so, and no haste or anything like that. But definitely a cool one. I think it's got some potential. We'll see. We'll see. Okay, next up for some uncommons, we've got the popular Egotist, which is a 3 mana 3/2. You can pay 2 to sacrifice another creature or enchantment to give it indestructible and tap it. It's kind of nice and can kind of protect itself. And whenever you sacrifice a permanent, target opponent loses 1 life, you gain 1 life. Now, there's also another uncommon, which is very similar to this, which is the Sawblade Skin Ripper that just got revealed, which is a 3 mana 3/2 again. It has Menace and 2 to sacrifice another creature or enchantment to put a +1/+1 counter on it. It's kind of, again, similar abilities here. And then the last ability is also quite similar. It says at the beginning of end step, if you sacrifice 1 or more permanents, it does that much damage to any target. So it kind of gives you some redundancy of this like effect of wanting to really sacrifice lots of permanents. Kind of in older formats with Cauldron Familiar loops, that could be kind of good. The Cat Oven combo, so maybe you play these cards in that deck. I'm not really sure. But in standard, we have Pitiless Carnage, which is a nice way to just sacrifice all your permanents at the same time. So if you had a popular Egotist and this guy, and you sacrificed like all your lands and tokens or whatever, um, at end of turn, they'd lose their that much life, and then at end of turn, they could lose that much life or deal damage to anything. With the Sawblade Skin Ripper, it's kind of nice with the Skin Ripper that it does it at the end of turn, because you could, with Pitiless Carnage, plot it and then float a bunch of mana, play the Pitiless Carnage, draw into the Sawblade Skin Ripper, and then play that, or more than one Skin Ripper, and then at the end of turn it would trigger and do the damage. So that's kind of interesting. Also, the Rotten Mouth Viper is kind of nice with these, just to get some extra value out of the permanents you sacrifice uh, to the Viper. So some interesting synergies with these guys. Both 3/2s. Kind of, I'm kind of surprised they've kind of printed both of them in the set at the same casting cost and the same uh, stat line and very similar ability. But I guess Red Black has got a sacrifice theme. So there it is. All right, next up we've got this cute little guy, the Skullsnap Nuisance, which is a blue and black or a insect skeleton with flying, a 1/4, and it has Eerie. So whenever enchantment you control enters, and whenever you fully unlock a room, surveil 1. So again, I'm not really like. The more I see this set with the Eerie abilities, the fully unlock a room um, part is seems a little like that's not going to happen all that often. I mean, it will maybe sometimes, maybe limited more often in constructed, but it feels like it's so much mana just to unlock rooms. But whenever an enchantment you control enters, is a good line of text, and it's kind of sweet with the Corpse of the Lost because of note this guy is a skeleton. So if you play this on 2, Corpse of the Lost on 3, you buff it up a little bit, you get a token, and then you also get a Surveil. And if you had a permanent card on the top of your library you put it in the graveyard, it would trigger the last effect on the Corpse of the Lost, that at your end step you could return the Corpse of the Lost to your hand, and then the next turn you could play it again, then trigger the Eerie, get another token, Surveil again. If you have a permanent, you can put it in your graveyard, and then continually bounce the Corpse of Lost every turn, basically, and get another token every turn. So there's some interesting synergy there. Maybe that's worth it in a skeleton deck. There's another skeleton enchantment too, so there's some cross synergy there. And then it's also an insect, and there's a little bit of insect synergies going on with the Swarmweaver to give him +1/+1 and Death Touch. So I mean, if this guy had +1/+1 Death Touch at 2/5, flying is a really blocker is really good. So maybe there's some Sultai deck where you play both of those in it. I'm not really sure, but just something to note with this card. Seems like a pretty cool creature. Having a 1/4 flyer for just for 2 mana and an ability is some good value. So we'll see. All right, and last up we've got the Overgrown Zealot, which is a 2 mana 0/4 Elf Druid. Tap to add a mana of any color, add 2 mana of any one color. Spend this mana to turn permanents face up. So we've got the Dread ability, Manifest Dread ability, which could be used with the last ability, and also disguise cards and things like that. Cloaking could be used for that, but I was thinking also it's an elf, which could be relevant. I was mostly thinking this is pretty good mana dork, because I don't think there's any other mana dork in standard that has 4 toughness. So it certainly is. Most of them are like 1/3 or 2/2. Um, so it stands out to me in that regard the most, in that it could be used in. There's some like toughness matters strategy, janky strategies if you want to go that route in standard. Still kind of curves nicely into the bedrock tortoise and the fecund green shell. So in your turtle tribal deck, the Pride of the Hull Clade cares about having a lot of toughness in play. So maybe it doesn't have defender, so you can attack with it. Um, so maybe it's worth it in that kind of strategy. Not that a strategy is really tier 1 or anything like that, but and maybe they'll print more toughness matters stuff in the future, and that this guy will be useful. But I think it's kind of just decent if you play it on turn 2. It could potentially like block and save you quite a few life points throughout the game, which is really what you want to do when you're ramping against aggressive decks. So it could see play just in a traditional ramp deck as well as sort of a 2-drop that can actually block and stall the game out long enough for you to drop your big creatures. All right, so that's basically what we got today and the previous day. Thanks so much for watching. I think we have another week of spoilers coming up. Let me know what you're excited about, what kind of cards, decks you're building with Duskmourn. This deck, or this, sorry, the set is looking pretty cool, and lots and lots of interesting combo potential for sure. So I'm going to have a ton of brews coming to the channel when the set releases on Arena. Mostly do standard combos. So stick around to the channel if you want to see these cards in action coming up when they release in a few weeks. And thanks so much for watching. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video.